Good morning. Let me see the hands of you who are here for the very first time. Oh, a good number of you. Well, the last time I was here was about 10 years ago. It's hard to believe that so much time has passed. But it's been 10 years. And my wife and I have done a lot of traveling abroad and done work abroad in other countries, and we've returned back to the United States. And my topic this morning is to speak to you about sleep and rest. And I think the question was just asked, how many of you got enough sleep or rest last night? And I saw some hands raised. Could I ask you to raise your hand again? Okay. How many think sleep is very important? Then why didn't you get enough sleep? Huh? Yeah, I think you'll probably be like most people. And we're going to see something a little later on here in this presentation to let you know that in this country alone, the United States, there's a lot of things that have taken place in the last few decades that has disrupted the amount of sleep that the average American gets. And that's very, very important. But let's talk about sleep. Anybody know what is sleep? And what's the difference between sleep and rest? Are they the same? No, they're not. What's the difference between sleep and rest? What do you think sleep is? Why is sleep? Which is more important, sleep or rest?
Sleep.
Why?
Because it changes brain waves.
Okay.
It allows for a deeper rest.
Okay. Sleep is a dynamic process. In other words, it's constantly changing. But not only is it a dynamic process, it's a very essential process that's very necessary for the human body for survival. We can't do without sleep. Humans cannot do without sleep. And despite all the decades we've been studying sleep and trying to understand it, we still don't really know why we sleep. We don't know why we sleep, but we know it's necessary. It's absolutely necessary. And some people can sleep for 8 hours and need 8 hours of sleep. Some need more. Some can even survive off of 4 hours of sleep. But I use the term survive. Survive. Okay? So a person who's surviving off of 4 hours of sleep or just a little bit less than 6 or 7 hours of sleep is only surviving. They're not reaching that optimal or normal amount of sleep. That's very, very important. Now, rest, you can have rest. For instance, you're here for a fitness program. If you go out and exercise, after you've exercised for a period of time, you want to rest, right? Rest. Now, there's a difference between rest and sleep. You can get rest as a result of sleep, but if you rest, does not necessarily mean you benefit from it the way you would benefit from sleep, and that's very important. They're not the same. There's a difference, and science has identified a fascinating concepts and factors about rest and sleep. Rest is defined as a period of relief and refreshing, okay, from an intentional mental and physical activity, okay? That's rest, okay? Without, of course, the person experiencing recuperation, revitalization, rejuvenation, and recovery of the whole person. In other words, you can rest and not necessarily be rejuvenated and revived, okay? But the rejuvenation, revitalization, recuperation only takes place basically when you sleep at night, okay? That's the way the body's designed. Sleep, on the other hand, is an absolute specific necessary state and process of the brain. It involves the brain and the entire body in which the individual is able to experience recuperation, rejuvenation, revitalization, and recovery from the whole person. The whole person experiences it, okay? Rest is almost always an outcome component of sleep, but does not necessarily provide the same benefits as sleep. And that's something we need to keep uppermost in our mind. A person who spends very little time sleeping, who gets insufficient amounts of sleep, eventually, or gets poor sleep at night, eventually will find that their systems, their body, is beginning to wear down and might even come to a point where they become completely dysfunctional, okay? About 20 or 30 years ago, the state of New York passed a law for all incoming medical interns and residents. Because what they found over a period of time in studying them is that many residents, and I experienced this myself when I did my training, sometimes you have to be on call. And when you're on call, you begin a day, say you begin a day at 7 o'clock in the morning. Normally your off time would be whenever time you finish that evening. But if you're on call, you have to stay on call the entire night. And so you're on call for a whole 24 hours. And so sometimes people would be on call for 30 hours and more. And what many people experience during that time is they find their minds getting kind of fuzzy, they get a little confused, and they can't give their patients the optimal amount of service that they actually need. So that's very, very important. Very, very important. So the state of New York passed a law that said that if a doctor is in training and he or she does not get sufficient sleep during the time that they're on call, they should not be operating. They should not be trying to function. Okay? So they've changed their laws. As a process of that, as a result of that, many of the states across the United States have changed their laws as well, governing the training of medical doctors. A major distinction between rest and sleep is that we feel and function at our optimal either after a good night's rest. If you get a good night's rest, you feel on top of the world. You can rest from running or exercising, and you still may not necessarily feel on top of the world. You feel better, but you don't necessarily recuperate. Now, I'm going to talk to you about both a mental and a physiological process that actually happens. Human need for sleep can get so strong that after a few days, what they found from research is that after 72 hours or 3 consecutive days without sleep, the mind develops what is called a type of psychosis. A psychosis. In other words, you lose the ability to distinguish between reality and what's not real. Okay? That's one of the reasons why if you have a doctor working on you and he or she hasn't had sleep in three days, you better be a little cautious. Okay? Because they may not be functioning at their optimal and may not be able to give you the best care that they can give you. And it's not intentional, but when you're working and you're working long hours, it can actually cause some problems. They get confused, forgetfulness, hallucinations, diminished limitations in physical functioning. If you go without sleeping for 3 consecutive days, you will find that some things you can normally do physically, you feel restricted. Your capacity to do those things is limited. Okay? That's something we need to keep in mind. The longest record we know in modern times was developed in 1964 by a young high school student in Honolulu, Hawaii. 1964, young man by Randy Gardner. He stayed awake for 264 consecutive hours, which amounts to about 11 days and 25 minutes. Okay, that's a long time. And he was monitored by a professor from Stanford University to make sure that he actually got the record before that was 262 hours. Okay, so he eclipsed it by just a little over 2-point-something hours. Now, the human body needs sleep and rest. We can go without air for only a few minutes. The maximum amount of time the human brain can go without air is about 4 minutes. After that, it's permanent brain damage. Then we can go without water for several days, probably the maximum about 7 to 10 days without water. But we can only go without sleep for hours or a few days, okay? So it's very, very important to have sleep. Going without sleep for more than 3 days causes serious health problems, very serious health problems, okay? Changes and important in the life and health maintaining principles. People don't necessarily sleep because, why do you think you sleep? Because you want to? Not necessarily. There's some people who have what we call sleep disorders, and they're unable to sleep on a regular basis. They have what we call insomnia, and some people have it develops because of medication sometimes. It's because of sleep disorders. You've heard of the term narcolepsy. That's a particular sleep disorder that's passed on genetically from one member of family to others. So there are various different reasons why many people have difficulty sleeping at night. Okay? The brain emits several different types of brain waves when we're sleeping. Okay? And even when we're awake, if you look up here, it tells you what kind of brain waves are emitted during the time we're active, the time we're sleeping, the time we're engaging in certain types of physical activity as well. The root of all thoughts and emotions and behavior is the communication between neurons within our brains. One of the most important things that researchers have found out is that if we don't get adequate amount of sleep, we have difficulty repairing our brain cells. Have you heard of the term neuroplasticity? For many years ago, more than 30-something years ago, almost 40 years ago, when I first started studying medicine, we were told that the human brain could not regenerate nerves in the brain once they're damaged or lost. We know that to a certain degree that's not necessarily true. Information has been shown that they can be. But what is very important is the development of neuroplasticity. And that is new nerve connections can actually be developed, okay? They're developed, and brain cells help them do that when we get adequate amounts of sleep. That is very, very important. There are two types of sleep. One is a non-REM sleep, a rapid eye movement, non-rapid eye movement sleep, and the other one is a rapid eye movement sleep. Let's just go through these two briefly. The non-rapid eye movement sleep has three stages, whereas rapid eye movement has 4 stages, okay? And the difference between the 3 and the 4 different stages is the fact that the 4th stage is where we dream. How many of you dream? How many of you like to dream? Dreaming is good. That's very good. When you don't dream, you usually don't wind up getting a significant amount of rest. But in the non-rapid eye movements, the 3 stages, the first stage is a changeover from wakefulness to sleep. In other words, it's not really a true sleep. It's light sleep for just several minutes. The heartbeat slows down, the breathing slows, the eye movements are slow, and muscles twitching starts goes to a point where you become relaxed. Occasionally, brain waves twitches to slow from daytime wakefulness. The second stage is that non-REM sleep is light sleep period. It's where after about 6 or 7 minutes you start going into actual sleep, okay? Slow, the heart rate continues to slow and it's beating and breathing slows. You have deeper muscle relaxation. Your body temperature begins to drop from what we consider normally at about 98.6 down to about 96 or 95 in that area, okay? And the eye movement stops. Eye movement stops. Now, we can't control our eyes normally. Eye movement is what we call involuntary muscle movement. But when we're sleeping in the second stage of non-REM sleep, the eye twitching actually stops, okay? The brain slow waves begin. You have a marked electrical bursts of activity in the brain because the body's setting you up to relax the whole person so that you can actually begin to get a benefit from it. But in this particular stage, you're more repeated sleep cycles in stage 2 than in the other 2 cycles, okay? In stage 3, deep sleep period, that's a deep sleep period, is needed for a morning refreshing and feeling. You feel very refreshed after you've get to stage 3. Now, the human cycle, what we found from research is that the human sleep cycle lasts about 80 minutes, 80 to 100 minutes in each stage, in each cycle, okay? You start off in a few minutes, and then by the end of 90 to 120 minutes, you cycle into a rest, and then you go back before you started to begin. Go all the way back to stage 1 again, and you do that several times during the night. Now, it's a little different if you dream, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. During REM sleep cycles, we go through 4 stages of sleep. Now, we're talking about REM. So this is a difference. As the amygdala, how many of you can drive a stick shift? How many do not drive a stick shift? Okay, but you have a car. How many of you drive? Everybody in here drives, right? Now, what does the gear shift do? It allows the car to go in motion, right? The amygdala is a part of the brain. If you look up here, you see that little red dot up there? That signifies the amygdala. The amygdala is part of the brain system we call the limbic system, okay? And the limbic system is in the central part of the brain, and it has to do with your wakefulness and alertness, okay? Whether you're awake, when the limbic system starts shutting down is when we begin going into sleep stage. When we are alert like you're sitting here now, then the limbic system tones up, it's ready, it's aroused. Well, the amygdala is to the limbic system what your gear shift is to an automobile. It allows it to go fast or slow, up or down, back or forward. And so it's very, very important. The amygdala is very important in processing sleep in the human brain and the human body. Very important. Now, stage 1 of the REM sleep, very similar to non-REM sleep. It's not really true sleep. It lasts for about 5 minutes, 5-6 minutes. As the eyes close, body slows down and begin to drift into a deeper sleep. And then when that happens, you're into stage 2. Shallow sleep, heart and breathing decreases, only slightly, eyes are moving slightly. And then they become motionless. And they're not moving at all. similar to what we saw in stage 2 of non-REM sleep. Stage 3 is much deeper sleep. Heartbeat and breathing have slowed. The body temperature is decreasing. And around about that time, you've been sleeping for about 90 minutes, about an hour and a half. At that point, in REM sleep, that's when this takes place. REM sleep takes place. It's the deepest sleep. It takes about an hour to reach that heartbeat and the breathing have decreased to 20 to 30% of your normal rate. In other words, the whole body is slowed down. As the sleep cycle bottoms out in stage 4 and then climbs back up to stage 1 again. But at this point, in stage 4, is where we have REM sleep. That's where we start to dream. Start to dream. And you can have some very beautiful dreams. Some people dream in color. Some people dream in black and white. And it varies for different people, you know. And how long you sleep and how long you dream also varies from one individual to the other. What they have found, though, is that individuals who have difficulty sleeping or who have what we call short cycle sleeping, they do not usually have a lot of positive dreams. Those are individuals who have what we call nightmares, okay? But you can alter that. That can be changed. It takes some doing, but it can be done. This is a picture of what the sleep cycle actually looks like. Now, how many of you usually try to go to bed before 10 o'clock? Or others stay out? I know since now we have cable television and things like that, you can actually stay up all night and don't go to sleep. Not a good idea. But how many of you try to get to sleep before 10 o'clock? Why? And what makes you think that that's true? Did you hear what she said? No, she said don't tell them. I said, you have to come on. Tell them. What?
It says every hour before midnight is like 2 hours after midnight as far as your body goes, as far as regenerating your body.
Well, you know, there's a lot of truth in what she just said. Because what happens after midnight is a lot of hormonal changes start taking place in the body. Okay? A lot of activities start taking place. As you sleep, that's when the body starts revitalizing itself. It starts repairing itself. When we are awake during the day, we're involved in a lot of different activities, aren't we? Talking, doing our regular work, maybe if you work in IT or some other area like that, or whatever it is your work you do, you're very involved in that work. But while you're doing that, the body's going through normal metabolic processes. And when you're going through normal metabolic processes, there are breakdowns that are taking place in your cells and tissues. Those things need to be repaired. And they are only repaired when you sleep. They're not repaired in the daytime. There's no time for repair to take place in the daytime. That's why we must sleep. That's why sleep is that's one of the major reasons we found that sleep is absolutely necessary. So as we go through these cycles, it's very, very important. So if you get to sleep before 10 o'clock, you're doing okay. You see this number here, 1 a.m., 1 and 2 a.m.? There's a hormone that's released there from the pineal gland called melatonin. And there's another hormone how many of you have heard of the stress hormone, cortisol? Heard of cortisol? Well, people call it the stress. I don't like to call it the stress hormone, but some people do. As soon after the melatonin is released at 1 and 2 a.m., cortisol is released about 3 a.m., okay? These are part of what we call the circadian rhythms. The body goes through what we call 24-hour cycles. It's a normal process that deals with the endocrine system. And it's very, very important to understand that. Now, here's the pineal gland up here. Here's a picture of the endocrine system. And these are some parts. I'm not going to get into all the technicality of this, but the pineal gland is a little part in the brain, just beneath the eyes, where the cords for the eyes cross, what we call the optic chiasma. Just beneath that just above that is a little gland about the size of a pea, a green pea. And it actually releases melatonin, okay? Melatonin is what allows us to sleep at night, because melatonin plays a very integral part in helping us to get our rest. And it also helps us in repairing the different cells and tissues and the organs in the body. Very, very important. Here's the pineal gland again. Melatonin is a hormone that's produced by the pineal gland. It's responsible for rejuvenating and repairing the body at nighttime. That's its major function. Now, one thing about melatonin is that it's not produced uh, and store it. It has to be produced every day. Your body produces melatonin every day, and you need sufficient amounts of it. I've noticed that recently the nutraceutical industry has actually began to sell melatonin on the market. But some people purchase it. I don't. I have some very strange ideas about those, and I should say not strange but different. I think it's better to produce your own melatonin, okay? Because the melatonin that you get from on the market is actually, most of it is not human. It comes from animals, okay? And melatonin is melatonin. Animals need melatonin as well because they sleep as well, okay? But it's better to use your own, all right? The optimum melatonin production takes place usually between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. You saw the sleep cycle a few minutes ago? That sleep cycle is when melatonin is produced, is released, okay? Now, it starts production around 1, but it's released between 2 and 3. Then as soon as it stops its production, getting moving, shortly after that, the cortisol is released. Cortisol is released. Now, what does cortisol do? Cortisol says, well, I normally get up at about 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. I have a lot of days' activities planned before me. And cortisol is released by the body to hit the adrenal glands, causing release of epinephrine, which is a hormone that helps break down glucose. Okay, it speeds up the body when a person is excited or whatever. Have you heard of the fight or flight syndrome? Well, epinephrine, or what we used to call adrenaline, is released at that time, and it prepares you to fight or flight. If you're afraid, particularly if you might be afraid of suppose you're afraid of a dog, and a dog comes out at you. Mentally and physically, your body's prepared to deal with the situation. It's a stressor, okay? So the body's prepared to deal with it, and what the body does is it releases epinephrine, prepare you to either run or fight, okay? I don't know which you probably choose to do, but you want to be prepared to face that situation. So here is a situation where melatonin is released at 2 to 3, cortisol is released at 3 o'clock, and cortisol breaks down in our liver. We have about an 18-hour supply of glucose in our liver. It's stored in the form of what we call glycogen. Glycogen is just repeated units of glucose. Glucose is the primary energy source for the human body. And the brain, of course, requires the most. We need about 100 grams of glucose to keep our brain functioning. That's the energy source for our brain every day. We need about 100 grams, okay? This is why the foods that you eat are very important, okay, to make sure you get adequate amounts of glucose. And the brain gets priority over every other organ system in the entire body, even over the heart, okay? Now, what happens here is that sometimes the pineal gland, the eyes can actually produce melatonin under certain conditions. But melatonin is only released when you're in a dark room. Do you ever wonder why we have to sleep in a dark room? How many of you sleep with light on? I hope you wear eye mask, because otherwise you may be depriving yourself of adequate sleep. Because melatonin can only be released when it's dark. Some years ago, when my daughter was young, very young, my wife was working in health, and we made a decision that up until she reached primary school, we didn't want her to go out to a sit or anything. So we decided that, well, one of us has to make a compromise. So I said, well, my schedule can be flexible, so I'll make the compromise. I'll work nights. So I used to work nights in emergency room, and I did it for like 3 or 4 years. Till my daughter reached the age of about 5 or 6, ready for school. But what I found is that when I would get off from work in the morning, how I felt and how I responded was entirely different. I would go home and try to sleep in the daytime. Have you ever tried to sleep when there's a lot of light? Not very comfortable, is it? And even if you do get some sleep, it's not a very fitting type of a feeling with sleep. So you have to have darkness for melatonin to actually function, okay? You need darkness, okay? Melatonin levels will signal a drop during the light time and rise during the dark. In other words, in the daytime where you're sitting here, melatonin levels are very, very low, almost minimal. But as soon as night comes and you're ready to go to bed, you go into a dark room and lie down and ready to sleep, melatonin levels are released probably shortly after you fall asleep. But it reaches its peak around between 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning. Now, there's some systems that are in the body that are very affected by you not getting enough sleep and rest. And they're very important systems. Let's look at them. Okay? So these are some of the systems: the immune system, the lymphatics, the nervous system, the brain, musculoskeletal system, and the endocrine system. All these systems are affected. And we're going to see these in a few minutes again. Now, let's look at the brain. The brain is a very interesting organ. The brain is to the human body what a computer is, similar to what a computer does. Okay? But the brain has within inside of it the mind. Do you know there's a difference between the mind and the brain, right? Did you know that? You didn't know that? Somebody saying no, some saying yeah. There's a difference between the mind and the brain. If you've ever seen a computer, the computer can function only if it has what? Software. So the mind is to the brain what software is to computer. The software in your brain is your mind. Your mind thinks, reasons, feels emotions, loves, hates, but it's not the brain. It's inside the brain, and it's the control center for the body. Okay? Keep that in mind. But the brain, the brain is only about 3 to 3.5 pounds, but it's only 2% of the total body weight in the average person. But it serves some very important functions. You have over 100 trillion synaptic connections. And the synapses in the body are what allows us to perform. It allows me to stand here, allows you to sit there, and allows you to move around. All the different things we do, the thinking, the physical activity we do, all those things, the metabolic processes that take place in the body, are all controlled by synaptic connections in the body. It has over 750 millimeters of blood. So do you know that the brain at any given time controls about 20% of the body's total blood? Even though it only makes up a small amount of the body's weight, the adult human body has about 5 liters of blood. At any one given time, there's at least 1 liter in your brain. Okay, very important. So it's important that the body get adequate blood supply. The brain is the only organ in the system that has multiple feeding systems for arterioles. We have 8 arteries that feed into the brain. We don't even have that many feeding into the heart. Okay? The brain gets priority over every other organ system in the body. This is why it's very important that we take care of our brain. It's very important why we get the adequate rest that we need. Difference between the brain. We just talked about that. Okay? Why do we need sleep? There are no off switches in the brain. We have no off switches in the brain. While we're working at night, while we're sleeping at night, the brain is working. The brain is working. It's sending messages to different parts of the body to repair the damage that's been done and to get us ready for the next day's activities. Without sufficient hours and quality of sleep, the person would eventually become completely dysfunctional, and experience a shutdown and a premature death. I remember some years ago when I was doing my training, and I was doing a rotation in mental health. And one of my patients was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And one of the most important things we found out about this particular patient was that she was not getting adequate amounts of sleep. And if you already have a mental health or behavior disability or problem, and you don't get adequate amounts of sleep, what do you think happens? It makes it worse. It makes it worse. So her situation was worse. It got worse because she was not getting adequate amounts of sleep. So it's very important that you get adequate amounts of sleep. Okay, the average adult spends about 1/3 of our lifetime sleeping. Did you know that? 1/3 of your life you spend sleeping. So if you're going to spend that much of your time sleeping, you want to get the best benefits you can get from it. A chronic lack of sleep, or getting insufficient amounts of sleep, increases the risk of all kinds of disorders: high blood pressure, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, heart attack, strokes, you name it. Our autoimmune system, the immune system is very severely affected if we don't get quality sleep and sufficient hours of sleep. So we need to make sure we get adequate amounts of sleep. How much sleep is enough? How much sleep is enough? You say it varies? Yeah, it varies with the person. I remember when my wife and I first got married, I was getting at least an average of 6 or 7 hours of sleep, but I realized my wife needed 9 hours of sleep. And even to this day, she still sleeps a little bit more than I do. And it's a personal need, and it has to do with the individual. And you will be able, you can study yourself and find out what your needs are. Find out how much sleep it takes you to actually feel your maximum. Here we're going to talk a little bit about the physiological, the physiology. Since you're into a fitness program, it's important that you understand that exercise is extremely important for you to keep your body functioning and sleeping at night. Exercise helps you to sleep well at night, right? If you exercise on a regular basis, you'll find that sleeping is very beneficial for you. It comes very easy for you. I know when I exercise, when I go to bed at night, as soon as my head hits the pillow, within minutes or seconds almost, I'm out. So it's very, very important. Not your head, huh? Well, you probably need to do something about that. Because there's some hormones, there's some enzymes, what we call neurotransmitters are released. You heard of serotonin? Serotonin is what we call the feel-good neurotransmitter. When you feel excited or happy about something, the body's releasing serotonin. You've heard of dopamine? Dopamine and serotonin work very well together. Both of them are made from one particular amino acid called tryptophan. Tryptophan is very important. And the foods that you eat, most foods that you eat, you want to make sure you have tryptophan in it. Okay, and if almost all proteins have tryptophan in it, if it's a quality protein. But there are a lot of foods that may be missing that particular amino acids. Here is an example of what we call, when we talk about the brain. The picture at the top is the brain. It's a picture of the brain. What you're seeing down here is the mind, because these are the things that's going on inside the brain. Okay? This is your thoughts. This is your plans, the actions that are taking place. And it's just showing a picture of what really happens as the mind is functioning during the day. And if you have, like most people, we have multiple things going on with our minds. A lot of things are going on. But the brain and the mind work together to process those thoughts and functions. Mental rejuvenation and memory. This cannot be done during waking hours. The repair that the body needs, the whole body, cannot take place unless we sleep. This is why it's important for you to get adequate amounts of sleep. You must sleep. And if you ever had a situation or challenge where you're stressed out about something, or there's a deep problem or something that needs to be resolved, and you decide to sleep on it, what happens? The brain goes through what we call a reorganization process. It reorganizes your thoughts, helps your memory recall. And this is why we tell students, I remember when I was an undergrad student, I made a mistake once. I was taking a biochemistry course, and I was pre-med, I was taking a biochemistry course, and for some reason or another, I had goofed off and had not studied for this particular test. And the night before, I stayed up the entire night studying for the test the next day. The test was scheduled for 8 o'clock the next morning. I went and took the test. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, if you had asked me one question about that test, I couldn't tell you what was on the test. Why? I didn't get any sleep. So my total recall was gone. So what did I learn? Probably not much. But I promised myself I'd never do that again, and I never did. That's why it's important. If you are a student, or if you have a presentation or some special appointment you have to remember or have to make a presentation on, it's good to get a good night's rest, because it will help your recall, it'll strengthen your memory, it'll strengthen your brain, and it'll help your whole body, even make you more relaxed. We have decisions to make sometimes, and every decision we make, believe it or not, emotion is involved in it, okay? The amygdala's activity in sleep may be the reason why some people are more resilient in response to stress than others. How the amygdala works in us, and it comes from practice. When I have a friend, a very dear friend, who does not like stress, period. Does not like stress. There's two types of stress: eustress and distress. What is the difference? What is eustress? Eustress means it's positive, it's beneficial. The very fact that you're here for a fitness class, that's eustress. In other words, you're doing something positive that will benefit your health and your life. That's eustress. Distress is something that disrupts your life or activities or plans or whatever. That's distress. But the challenge for us as humans is we have to remember this. Even if we don't like distress, it's good for the human brain to experience a certain amount of stress. Why? Because it strengthens the brain. It allows the brain to be able to be resilient and very good at problem solving. If you never experienced stress, how would you be able to solve a problem? If you never had a problem, how could you solve it? Okay? So you need a certain amount of stress. So don't run away from the stress. Okay? Find a way to work through it and resolve it. And this is one of the things that sleeping and getting adequate amounts of rest can actually do for you. I'm going to move a little faster here now. Okay? The wake time, the entire body's metabolism climbs to a peak of about at 8 o'clock in the morning. Do you know by 8 o'clock in the morning the cortisol levels have reached their peak? And by 3 o'clock in the afternoon they've gone down? So if you eat, and this is a challenge for many women, particularly if you're menopausal, okay? Because when you start losing estrogen, the body works a little differently. And this is why many women find themselves eating probably less food or even the same amount they ate before, and they gain weight. Why? Well, one of the reasons is because the cortisol functions a little differently in the body with women. Because women have a higher percentage of fat than men do anyway. It's just they're made that way. And that's positive. It's not negative. It's positive. So what we have to do is we have to make sure that if we're going to maintain our weight or maintain a healthy weight, we're going to kind of tone down at a certain time of the day that you're not eating any more food. Say by 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, that's it. Especially for heavy food. Now, if you want to eat a little snack, maybe an apple or something in the evening, that's fine. But if you're going to eat a lot of heavy food in the evening, and this is what we do in this society. I've traveled in different parts of the world, and there are many places that do not eat their heaviest meal in the evening like we do. I learned to eat my heaviest meal in the morning when I first get up, because that's when the body needs the most food. That's why we call it the break fast, break the fast, breakfast, or breakfast, okay? Eat your heaviest meal in the morning. That way, during the day, when you're doing your regular physical activities, you have a chance to burn off those calories. But if you take heavy calories in the evening, what's going to happen? You're going to pile it on. I'm talking about the weight. You don't want that. And that happens to men as well, okay? And you particularly want to make sure you don't put it on in here. Because if you have weight put on in the middle or abdominal region, that fat covers the visceral organs here. It blocks or interferes with your digestive processes and increases the risk of stroke, heart attack, and diabetes, okay? Exercise, very, very important. Walking, okay? Now, if you're going to walk, make sure you do brisk walking. Don't just walk at a casual pace. You don't have to be a marathon runner, but just make sure you do something that's going to benefit your body. There's all kinds of exercise. Exercise is extremely important. But even if you exercise, you must still get adequate amounts of sleep. Very, very important. One of the things exercise does for you is it helps regulate your glucose levels, helps regulate your blood pressure. Very, very, very important. Okay, helps maintain the heart and cardiorespiratory system. Extremely important. This is gamma-aminobutyric acid is a neurotransmitter that's produced in the brain. It helps slow things down a little bit in the body. But it also works along with the hypothalamus in the body to control sleep. And this is something very important. Most people maintain some ability to sense light and are able to modify their sleep-wake cycle. But persons or individuals who are blind have a disruption in their sleep, in their light-dark cycle. So it's very difficult for them to be able to regulate the difference between dark and light. Some people who are legally blind can still, perhaps because they have, even though they may not be able to make out figures, they can still sense and distinguish light. And if you can still distinguish light, it makes it a lot easier for you. But if you're totally blind, that's a little different. But it's important that some people understand this. Because this is where the melatonin comes in, that's where the pineal gland works, all of this works in. And this has to do with the various different parts of the body here. The pons and the medulla also play a key role, they're part of the base part of the brain down here. They also play a very important part in the REM sleep. The thalamus allows us to tune out the external world. Thalamus works, it's a part of the limbic system. We talked about the limbic system earlier. It's another part of the limbic system that allows us to tune out the world while we sleep, okay? These processes of information are short term. It also helps us to process information from short term to long term. This is another benefit of sleeping. If you want to learn something, study it before you go to bed, and then go to bed, and you wake up the next day. Even if you don't remember it completely, you have a better memory than you would have had before you studied, okay? It's very, very important. It does a lot for you. If you don't get adequate amounts of sleep, in terms of hours or quality of sleep, it increases your risk of depression. Very, very important. Many people who go into depression because they don't get adequate amounts of sleep. It's very important that they change that cycle.
Could you put that one back?
Put it back? Sure. It's very, very important. And another thing, too, is if the REM stage, which is stage 4 of the REM sleep, if it's disturbed during your sleeping stages, then it also increases the risk of you developing depression. Okay? Very important. I'm going to give this to Mrs. Scott anyway, so if you want a copy of it, you're welcome. Okay? Spirituality and sleep. Now, it's important to understand that sleep affects our whole body. Okay? It affects mind, body, and spirit. So our spiritual thoughts are very, very important. What we think, rest. Do you know that there's some times of the week, particularly where cortisol levels are lower than other times of the week? Did you know that? Yeah. They're lower than other times of the week, specifically because physiologically the body has determined that that's the time to rest. Okay? And you need to understand that that happens. When that happens, it affects our spirituality, how we think about our Creator, how we think about our environment, the surroundings, all the beautiful things we see around us. All those things are very, very important. And if you look at every religion, at least all the major religions, in every religion, the spiritual seekers have been mystified by sleep and rest. And they also have some idea of what sleep and rest does for them. Long before modern scientists could quantify the stages of sleep, it was determined by religious leaders that that it's important that sleep takes an integral part in communication. If you'll find that if you don't sleep adequately, your communication will be very, very limited, or interfered with. Very important. Spiritual traditions of several religions offer several simple insights into the mighty journey preparing mind, body, and settle down from daily sleep. How many remember the little prayer about laying your head down before you go to sleep? Now I lay me down to sleep. Pray the Lord my soul to keep. That's very, very important. That's a little kind of like a mantra for some people, but it's very, very important, and it does something to relax the mind. Okay? Very important in relaxing the mind. So physiology, neurology, all of this is interrelated. Rejuvenating, restoring processes, and embracing the body by the mind. All is very important. Now, this is what I want to talk about study. A study was done some years ago, and what they tried to find out is was there a decrease in the amount of sleep that children particularly experience. They went to 15 countries worldwide, and they looked at the different countries, and they looked at the children from ages between 5 and up to age 18 to determine whether or not they were getting adequate amount of sleep. But the one thing they did not do is they didn't determine what the quality of the sleep was. And what they found out is that these young people, these children, actually slept less. Now, in the age we live in, there's so many things that can draw your attention away from getting sleep, particularly if you're a child. Okay? I have a granddaughter, and sometimes when she comes by the house, her mind's not focused. It's focused on a lot of technology stuff, the computers and doing those kinds of things and whatever. And even if you tell her, sweetheart, it's time to go to bed. Oh, I'm not ready. But you see, it's not a matter of being psychologically ready or physically ready. You need to get the rest. And she will stay up all night if you're allowed to. But that's not good. That's not good at all. So what they found is that in general, in many of the countries, and even including our country, a lot of children do not get adequate amount of sleep. In fact, on the average, they get about I think they came up with about 5 to 10% less sleep than children got over 103 years ago, okay, at the turn of the 20th century. So that's very important to understand. Now, they also found out that the average, and when they looked at infants usually sleep about 12 and a half, 12, a little more than 12 hours a day, toddler about almost 12 hours. But then as children got older, they of course sleep less. And also as we get older, we sleep less. They used to say that when you get into your 60s and 70s and older, you don't need as much sleep as you needed when you're 30 and 40. How many of you believe that? I don't see any hands. Why not? It goes back to what we said earlier. It depends on the individual. Some people still need the same amount of sleep now when they get older than they needed when they were younger. It's very, very important. It's not like food. When we're in our growing processes, up to the age of 35, we can eat a certain amount of food, and sometimes we feel like we don't put on any weight or whatever. And we keep eating the same amount of food, and we're fine. But we think we're fine. But we should reduce the amount of food that we eat as we get older, because your body doesn't need as much. Metabolism changes as we get older. But sleep is a little different. Sleep is a little different. As we get older, the amount of sleep you needed when you were younger pretty much remains fairly constant. Not for everybody, but fairly constant for many people. Okay? And we're coming down to a close now. But short sleepers, if you're a short sleeper, please make some changes. Short sleeper is a person who sleeps 6 hours or less. 6 hours or less. You need to do something to make some adjustments in that. Right? Why? Because if you don't get enough sleep, what happens to the aging process? It speeds up your aging process. It causes deterioration and reduces the body's capacity to repair, rejuvenate, and revitalize the organs and tissues in the body. So you need to get you need an adequate amount of sleep to allow the body to do the rest and recuperation that it wants to do for you. Okay? Don't slow down the aging process by getting adequate amounts of sleep. But you can sleep too much too. Did you realize that? Okay? You can sleep too much. And if you sleep too much, what happens to your bones? If you lay down in the bed for a whole week, what happens? You get up, you can hardly stand up. Okay? This is one of the reasons why when a person, if a person is bedridden for a period of time, if he or she is sick, we try to get them ambulated so they can get up and move around, because the muscles get weak, the bones, the joints. You want to make sure all those things are functioning properly. The circulatory system starts to break down, wear down, so your circulation is not adequate. So all those things are very, very important. Not getting enough sleep can increase the possibility of obesity. Okay? Now, if you're in a fitness program like this one, you don't want that. In fact, you came here, I'm sure, to maintain a certain level of health. So you don't want to be putting on weight as you get older. All right? Keep that in mind. Adequate amounts of sleep. All right? There's another study was done by identical twins, monozygotic twins. They studied up here 21,000 twins for more than 22 years. Now, the reason monozygotic twins are very good study people is because their cellular structure and everything is pretty similar, and usually they grow up in pretty much the same environment. But when they looked at these individuals, they realized, even though they're very carefully constructed the same way, there's still a difference between them. One might need more sleep than the other. And the one that got the less sleep was the one that's most prone to sickness. Okay? With that going, I think that's about it. There's a whole lot. I have a whole lot of other slides, but I think this is more than enough.